She looked down at herself and regretted her choice of clothes. The knee-length red cocktail dress hid all her assets with nothing on display. She would have gone with something more sexier if she had known John was coming. She sighed in resignation. 6 months and she still hadn't gotten over her infatuation with him. It didn't help that he didn't seem to notice her at all. It only made her want him all the more. She heard the click of the front door as she weaved her way through the crowd to the entrance of the house. Peter stood there, his cell phone in his hand, with John wearing a serious expression as always. She straightened her dress, trying to look as sexy as possible. Not like she thought it would help. John wouldn't notice her. Period. But that didn't stop the aching between her legs each night in bed when she craved to have him inside her. She was shaken out of her thoughts by Peter's voice. "Elizabeth, I forgot some of my files at John's place, and I need them tomorrow. Could you go get it? I have to meet Dad right now. Take my car," he said as he frowned into the screen of his phone. Elizabeth hesitated, her eyes landing on John. To her surprise, he was watching her with a strange look on his face. "Okay," she said, still unsure. Again, to her utter surprise, John instantly turned around and opened the door for her. She walked out of the house, her heels clicking against the marble floor with John behind her. They had barely reached the car when she felt his hand on the small of her back, the heat radiating all over her skin. "Nice dress, Elizabeth," he whispered into her ear. She froze as she felt his breath against her skin. Clamping her thighs together, she gripped the car handle. "Thanks," she mumbled without turning around. The urge to have him inside her only intensified with his proximity. She almost cried out when she felt him move away and walk to the driver's side. "Elizabeth." Her head jerked up at the sound. Eyes widening in surprise, she stared at her ex-boyfriend walking up the path to the house. Had her parents invited him? She stole a glance at John, who stood on the other side of the car, his jaw clenched. She was about to ask him if he was all right when a pair of arms enveloped her in a hug. "God, I've missed you so much," Aiden murmured, burying his face in her hair, his hands moving over her back. "Aiden, what are you doing here?" she asked hurriedly, trying to disengage herself from his arms. Why did John have to be there? As if she didn't embarrass herself enough before him already. "I can't get you out of my head, Elizabeth." Aiden was now kissing her neck, and to her horror and humiliation, she felt his hands on her butt before his other hand reached up and cupped her breast. No sooner had she felt the touch than it was gone. John stood before her, a murderous expression on his face. Her hand flew to her mouth when she caught sight of Aiden on the floor behind him. "What are you?" she almost shouted, but was cut off when John suddenly grabbed her waist and pushed her roughly against the car. "Shut the fuck up," he hissed. Stunned, she could only stare up at him. She'd never seen John angry. He looked stunning. His blue eyes flashed with something she couldn't understand. "No one gets to touch you, Elizabeth. No one. But me. I think I've waited long enough," he hissed again as he leaned in and cupped her breast, his thumb flicking against her nipple. She moaned as she felt warmth pool between her legs. Reaching out, she placed her hands on his well-defined chest. She couldn't think. After all those months she had spent trying to get him out of her head, it had finally happened. She wanted him so bad it didn't matter if they did it against the car with Aiden watching them. "John, please." She moved her hands lower, arching her body against his. He pulled her hand away as he stared down at her, his lips inches away from hers. "Tell me, Elizabeth, do you want me to fuck you?" he whispered as he licked her lips. She grabbed his hand and placed it on her aching core, watching his eyes widen slightly. "Yes," she said, as she rubbed herself against his large hand. Instantly, his arm snaked around her waist and pulled open the car door as he roughly pushed her inside. She watched him walk around the front before getting into the driver's seat. She was finding it hard to breathe, and she could feel between her legs. Without a word, John reversed the car and drove them away. She kept her eyes on the road, trying hard not to yell at him to stop driving and just her. If given an option, she preferred not doing it in her brother's car. They had barely gone 100 meters from the house when he cursed loudly and took a detour leading them down a dirt road to a secluded spot. She didn't even have the time to unsnap her seatbelt.
John had gotten out and was at her door, his fingers expertly unsnapping the belt and dragging her out. Pulling open the back door, he nudged her inside before getting in himself and locking it. Grabbing her face, he slammed his lips onto hers. Elizabeth moaned with pleasure as she grabbed his hair and kissed him hard, biting on his lower lip and earning a growl in return. She felt his hand slip under her dress and move up her thigh as she untucked his shirt and moved her hands all over his chest. Her panties were drenched now, and she was having trouble keeping still. His fingers finally reached their destination, and Elizabeth tensed with the need coursing through her. He groaned when he felt the barrier of her lace panties. Turning them around so that she lay back on the seat, he slipped his hand out. Gripping the edges of her dress, he pulled it off her. Elizabeth kicked off her shoes, moaning as she felt his hands on her bare breasts. Thank God she had chosen not to wear a bra that day. John suddenly pulled away, causing her to cry out in protest. He quickly took off his clothes and shoes before coming back to her. Grabbing her legs, he pulled them apart. "I've waited to do this for so fucking long," he murmured before his head dipped, and she felt his mouth on her throbbing clit. Her head fell back as she gripped his shoulders, feeling the squelch of the leather underneath her.
She had never been eaten out before, and she was glad that John was her first. She felt his tongue move up her slit before he took her in his mouth, sucking and nibbling at her folds. "John, I'm about to come," she cried out as she felt her control slipping. "Not now, baby." He lifted his head before his hands moved up her body and cupped her breasts, squeezing them and teasing her hard nipples. Elizabeth was lost as he resumed his assault on her clit. His warm tongue slipped in and out of her, and her nipples were getting painfully hard. Then his hands left her breasts, and the next moment she felt his finger enter her. She couldn't hold back any longer. "Now, baby," she heard John's voice, and then she came hard, screaming as her orgasm hit her with full force. She felt him kiss her inner thigh as he moved atop her, his erection hard against her stomach. Elizabeth opened her eyes as he placed a kiss between her breasts. "Did you like it?" he asked softly as he took one breast in his hand, his fingers elongating her nipple and tugging at it. Elizabeth gasped again as she ran her nails down his back. "Yes!" she cried out when he replaced his fingers with his mouth, his teeth latching onto the nub and biting down on it before soothing it with his tongue. Moaning loudly, she grabbed his ass and squeezed the firm muscles. "I've wanted you for longer than you can imagine, Elizabeth," he said as he shifted his attention to her other breast, making her squirm beneath him. Reaching down, she grabbed his length and stroked it, making him let out a garbled curse. Feeling bolder, she stroked him harder, his moans making her more wet. "Stop," he commanded as he pulled her hand away and pressed them to her sides. In turn, she arched her body and crushed her breasts against his hard chest, raising her hips to meet his as she tried to relieve herself with the friction. "I want you inside me, John," she pleaded, trying to free her hands. But his grip was strong and he didn't relent. He leaned down as he licked her lips before slipping his tongue inside her mouth. She felt the head of his erect member probe at her opening before he slammed into her. Elizabeth cried out as she felt her walls contract at his size. He was so huge. Without giving her a chance to adjust, he pulled out before slamming back into her, harder than before. "You're so tight," he grunted as he grabbed her hips, pushing himself deeper, deeper, and deeper.
Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe.